right now on FB. My name is Amita. I am co-founder of Nourish Talk, a platform for natural and holistic medicine. In our educational session today, we are going to talk about how yoga therapy and structural integration can help with stress relief. We have Andrew Rosenstock, a highly sought after structural integrator and yoga therapist from US, and he works all over the planet. Andrew is also a certified rolfer. He's a certified structural integrated, as I mentioned before. He is 1,000-hour yoga therapist, an iRest Yoga Nidra trainer, and he also holds multiple certifications in Thai massage, Salon massage, and he's also a reconnection certified practitioner. Welcome, Andrew, to our show.
Thank you. It's a lot of titles, I know.
I know. I just wanted to make sure that I cover everything before you start talking.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great. So we will start with an overview of stress from your side.
Cool. So yeah, I can sort of run through. I have sort of a lineup here so we can see for those watching. We'll break down sort of what I thought we could do is sort of talk a little bit about how yoga therapy and structural integration can work with stress, because I'm pretty sure stress is something that everyone right now in the world is familiar with, and there's lots of different types of stress, and so we're going to go a little more global. But for example, you and I, just before when we were starting to have this call, we had some technical difficulties, right? And so we start to get stressed. Oh, the audio isn't working. This isn't. We have all these sort of feelings coming on, this happening, and there's both a psychological and a physiological aspect of that. And stress isn't always a bad thing, which is very important, because your heart beating, for example, is stress. There's a contraction, which is stress, and then there's a release. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I think stress gets a bad rep, and it's not always a bad thing, but we're going to look at maybe some of the detrimental aspects and how yoga therapy and SI work, or structural integration, can help. I'll say SI a lot because, as you found out from the title, structural integration becomes a big word sometimes. So we'll try to break it down into SI. And so let's look at the next slide, if cool, so we can talk a little bit about what is yoga therapy. So because yoga now, traditionally yoga, you would say, was therapeutic, but yoga is such a catch-all term now, right? There's yoga this and yoga that, and yoga, all these things, face yoga, eye yoga, yoga for sleep. And so what is yoga therapy if all of these things are therapeutic? Well, yoga therapy is this, what it says there is like the specific application of yoga tools. So some people, when they think of yoga, they just think of asana, which is what's in the West becomes super popular, right? You go to your class and you move, maybe you do some pranayama, some breath work, maybe you do some meditation, but most likely it's purely physical. And for thousands of years, yoga had very little physical within it, right? It had all these other tools as frameworks of looking at what was healthy life, what is life, and then only really recently has it become this physical practice, which is nothing wrong with that, but we have thousands of years of history. Why don't we actually sort of bring that in? And so a little later, we're going to use some tools that are called mudras, and mudras are generally known as hand seals, but they can actually be sort of any posture. In fact, an asana or a posture could be a mudra depending on the intent of it, we'll say. And a lot of the original asanas were actually mudras. If you look at like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the postures were mudras, because it was how they weren't moving, it was what their intention and their creating that body-mind connection. So we'll do a little later from a structural standpoint, but just looking at that yoga therapy, it's that the yoga really looks at how it's a phenomenological framework of what we as human beings are. And so the model that I use is what's called the Panchamaya Kosha, which is actually pre-yoga. It's a Vedic model, but it became incorporated into yoga and then later on. And that model is looking at what do they call the 5 layers of health. So for some of us, this might be really familiar, and for those who are newer, it's a way of looking at sort of 5 main areas of health of human, of which is physical. The second is sometimes referred to as breath, but it's really more energetic. It's the pranamaya kosha. It's the life force that's running through you. And then we have the manomaya kosha, which sometimes translates into mind, but I like to think of it a little more as our sort of our thoughts and our cognitions, right? Because mind becomes a larger term. And then the next is the Vijnanamaya kosha, which is sometimes referred to as our witnessing. And I think of it a little more like our intellect. Sorry, the first one's intellect. This is more like intuition. So intuition is very different than mind. Intuition is a felt sense. It is. I use the example sometimes of like you know, like, oh, I should call Amita. I haven't talked to her in a few days. And then just as I think that, the phone rings, right? I had no idea that you would ring, but there was a sense of something going in. When we get out of our thinking brain, we go back a bit. It's called witnessing because you're sort of like you're witnessing from behind, but it's also related for me into this intuition. And then the final would be what's called a bliss body. And I think of it a little more as when we're in deeper meditation and the sense of ourself, which is a construct of how we make ourselves up to be from all of our conditioning in life. When we can get beyond that and fall away, we drop into this beautiful space of which is our true essence and our true nature. And so those 5 layers or sheets are how a lot of traditional yogis look at what it is to be a human being. And then along that lines, we have, we fall out of balance, you can say. So you have a physical injury. So now our physical, our annamaya kosha, our food body is maybe a little bit out of balance and we need to do something with that. But that also it's not like they stick one-on-one, they have an interrelation. So we may hurt our physical, which causes us to be a little sad, right? And it affects the others. They're these permeable chains that are always sort of working together and separately. And so that becomes the framework of what health is. And through yoga therapy, we work with all of that. Yeah. So the next.
I was just going to comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Concept of Panch Mahakosha is very fascinating, and I don't think in Western world, even in Eastern world, I don't think people really understand the whole concept. We just go in and do our asanas, as you said earlier, and then we come in and come out without really understanding the depth, what you just talked about.
Yeah. I know that I'm very fortunate. So I've had some very great teachers that have educated me, both Eastern and Western teachers, and that sort of is where I come. And when I first did yoga was strictly physical, and even when we start to get into this stuff, I was very much like, this isn't important. It's all the physical, which is just that first kosha. But as we start to study more into that, it is so relevant, and it becomes the way that I try to teach, and the way when I work with people one-on-one, if I'm doing therapy sessions of any sort, is to try to get them to not just think about it, because you can understand something very, very logical in various ways, but to get them to actually feel the connections. And that's where for me, that's where the true growth comes in, is not when they just listen to what I'm saying, which is how most people are conditioned. They go to some sort of therapist who's telling them this and that. They go to a physical therapist who says, do these exercises. They go to a mental therapist who says, this is what's wrong with you, and they're constantly being told, and they're educated that, oh, okay, I have to be told about myself. Whereas the way that I understand yoga is we go to these people to help guide us, but they don't tell us. We have all the answers in ourselves, and as we start to feel it more, and it's, we say the word feel, but feel isn't the right word because it's a sense. It's not something you can actually touch, but it's something you can feel in your body. What's sometimes called a felt sense. You know it, you can experience it, but you may not have words for it, and that becomes really hard to explain, because how do you explain something that doesn't have words? Because we need words from it. And that's where yoga therapy is so beautiful, is you're able to take these concepts and give people a place where they can experience it, which is what yoga was. The tantric yoga path was about experiencing life. That's where in the 9th century and forward, what they were all doing was ways of experiencing our deepest senses of self, of whatever self is. So yeah, I agree with you. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, 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 absolutely. And I think a lot of people also don't understand what structural integration is.
Yeah,
So that's the
yeah.
next topic we want to talk
I
about.
think, yeah, I think you might be one of them. So, structural integration is it's sometimes referred to as rolfing, and rolfing is a more popular name, but some people don't know what that is, and it gets into trademark laws. So, while I am a rolfer, some people aren't, and so they can't say it. So, structural integration comes out of a lady named Ida Rolf, who was a biochemist in the 1920s. Like, just to put a little thought here, she's a lady as a biochemist, her PhD in biochemistry in the 1920s in America. Like, this just shows, like, nowadays this is very common, but in the 1920s, like, it shows how strong and determined of a person she was, because it wasn't an easy time in those days for women, for lots of people. And so she was basically looking at, I mean, she actually was studying yoga in the early 20s and 30s as well. And so a lot of what SI is has roots in yoga and roots in osteopathy. And in the US, osteopathy is not as known. So you can kind of think of it as sort of a more whole PT, but it's different. It has different roots. But what structural integration is doing is it's looking at the person. So you can see in this photo, you have sort of on the picture of the slide, you have these two bodies, of which is one is sort of like the lines are tilted and one is more aligned. And so one aspect, just like you were talking about yoga, one aspect of SI work could be purely physical. And so let's just start there. So we can sort of see the strain forces, right? So by looking at a body as a segmental part, you can start to reconstruct the whole by looking at the segments. But if you only look at segments, you're missing out on a greater picture. And this is where a lot of more allopathic medicine and even PT comes in handy, comes in the opposite, is that they look at structures really segmented. So you can say you look at your arm and you'll look at these areas here, and not thinking about how does the motor control come all the way through the body, right? So your arm is here, but the nerves are running all the way through, as well as the muscular components. Most people would say that the chest is here and the arm is here, but your pectoral muscles connect to your arm into your chest. So we start to, in SI work, we start to look at how the interrelation of everything, from the toes to the fingers to the head, so that we can take apart things segmentally, but thinking not just in the segment, but how does that connect to the greater good of the body. Now, there is also non-physical ways of it. There are energetic approaches to structural integration. There are psychological approaches to it. What is someone, and it's very similar in some regards to the yoga therapy model. What is somebody who is mentally, someone who's very depressed, right? This is what we talk a lot about in yoga when we talk about looking at bodies. How does a body that's depressed look to you? I mean, if you had to think of, oh, someone comes in and is depressed, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can, so it's hard to see the overall form of the body, but you can see the face, right? And expression on the face is how, you can tell when someone is happy or someone is, depressed or stressed out? Because I think your face is an expression or a mirror of your emotions and the body, right? I mean, that's
Right.
how normal people like me would think that the person is depressed.
Right. So we also would generally, and so these are stereotypes. These are prescriptions, but they don't fit everyone. But generally, the shoulders will be rounded forward. There'll be a
I
rounding in the shoulder girdle will be tucked in. It's very hard to just have one part of your body work without a tangential force going through the body, as there are reciprocal tensions in the body. So usually the chest might be a little caved in, right? We might go a little like this. Well, if I start to bring my chest forward, my arms are rotating inwards as well. There's going to be a force going throughout the body, through the hand, the pelvis, and so in SI we will look a lot at the interrelation, so that the pelvis and the shoulders are going to be heavily related, as this is where the appendages come into the body, right? And this is all more or less a lot of the superficial areas. We can start to get deeper and deeper into that. But this is a lot about sort of how I view the SI, the structural integration, and how to relate it into that yoga framework. So we can look at this physical. So someone comes in and we say how to walk. I'm not going to diagnose someone and say they're depressed. That's not my scope of practice. But I can notice patterns within there, and so say, okay, well, this pattern usually relates with these various ailments, or these structural ailments, these psychological ailments, these energetic ailments. Like you were saying about the face, sometimes people will come in and you'll just, they look perfect, but there's just something is off, and you don't know what it is, but you can sense like, oh man. And then you just say, is everything okay? And they might say, yeah, everything's fine, or they might be like, no, I'm having a stressful day. And especially now with COVID, right? And people's lives are completely upended. Nobody knows when or anything is going to happen, and they're just sort of waiting. There can be that the mind might be like everything's okay, but that energetic in there is just down. And so structure can help that, but it's not just putting a structure back in place is not going to necessarily change everything. And that's, at least for me, where I start to then bring in more aspects of the yoga model of what good health is, right? And meditation becomes really helpful for that, because most of the time meditation can be harmful for some people, but meditation usually then starts to come in because it's a way of working with both our conscious and our unconscious mental states. So for me, I really love to overlap the two. I love some of the clients I work with, and I'm working mostly on Zoom now. I love I'll watch them walk, and then we kind of can assess things based on the structural stabilities. And then maybe we'll bring a yoga pose in, or maybe a meditation, or maybe something that's a little bit different types of ways of moving that are not traditional yoga, but that will help that person find their inner sort of stability. Because a lot of what the structural integration approach is also thinking about is how do you exist within this world. A large part is about gravity. So if you look in the photos here, you can see, actually the next photo, let's go to the next photo, that'll show a little better. So we go to the next slide. And this kind of talks a bit about what I've already been saying, but you can kind of see that first picture where like gravity is pulling down, the body is collapsing into it. So we're doing so much work to hold ourselves up, right? And the second picture, it's sometimes referred to as like a sky hook, like a sky dropping down. When we are more aligned within gravity, there's actually a lot less work we have to do. And when I do the mudra shortly, I'll explain that a little bit differently so you can feel it. Because again, like I said earlier, you can take my words, they mean absolutely nothing until you really experience it. But as we're more aligned with gravity, we're doing a lot less, right? So we're actually doing less effort to do more, because we're not fighting this force that we can't see. Fighting gravity is like fighting the wind. It's fun to think about when the wind's coming and you're like, yo, get out of here, wind. But you're not going to win. and same, gravity is going to always pull us. So if I'm slouched forward here, gravity is naturally going to pull me down. now it becomes a part of me. I don't think about gravity. I don't think about that force. My back is doing so much work just to keep me from falling forward, right? And so it's straining extra work. But as we've said, it's not just one area. So we then have to realize, well, how's the back? Which muscles is it connecting into the hips? How is it going? Is it up into the neck? There's always, again, looking. We want to look narrow to look wide, and that's the same with yoga. We want to, like, we look at what is a person. It's so many things. So when they come in for an ailment, we say, okay, what is presenting, and what is actually sort of there. And as this slide talks about, both these views are holistic, right? So holistic gets a sort of sometimes a bad rap as well. People think of holistic and they think of, oh, if somebody's very physical and they said, oh, yoga is holistic, they say, no, I don't believe in oming. I don't do any of that holy stuff, right? Because that's how some people think of it. But holistic really just means the sum of the parts. It's a whole picture. So when you look at that Panchamaya kosha, it's a whole body. I don't see your mind, Amita, but your mind is a part of you. So when we start to look at that bigger, broader perspective, we're looking at the whole of you, right? Which is who's showing up and everything that's led to you to now and going forward. And same in SI, instructional integration. We're looking at the whole of who is showing up in the body, and your body is a representation of your life up to here. Right? So when you've had physical, mental, whatever injuries, they manifest in the body. They can go away, but they also can still manifest there. So we can see who is this person that is there from a whole level, not just, oh yeah, your arm hurts, but a bigger pattern of that. And they both, yoga can have non-dual frameworks. Yoga traditionally wasn't non-dual, but it later grew into non-duality. And non-duality becomes really difficult for us Westerners to understand because we exist. The US is a very dualistic society culture. I mean, even look at right now we have an election getting ready. It's two sides. We don't even really allow the other sides in. It's either, and so you're either Republican or you're Democrat. They don't even let you be really in between. And that's a lot of that comes from our educational system. A lot comes from, when you look at where does our education come from, so much comes from Descartes, at least in the West. So much comes from Descartes, which was the Cartesian logic of how we understand, and a lot of that aspect of what is the word? How we view ourselves as so segmented comes also out of Descartesian logic, the body as a machine. So it's thinking about everything really segmented, not as the whole. And you can go down to Plato as well and all that. Whereas in India and in the East, you had more traditionally of these, they grew into these non-dual frameworks of understanding the world. So in the West, we also have a Judeo-Christian, of which is a dual way of thinking. Well, I won't go too far into that, but just to say that all of our upbringing and our understanding and our culture brings us to where we are in our way that we understand reality. And yoga goes beyond that. It can go beyond that. And same with SI. And so both also are these biopsycho spiritual models of health. We don't look just at the body. We don't look just at the mind. We don't look just at the spirit. They're all intertwined, intermeshed together. And if you want to get healthy, we have to look at everything, at least how I understand it. And I think I'm pretty healthy.
Yeah. The next topic.
Yeah.
I think you talked about this. Would you like to say something about this? They help.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably talked a lot about it. I generally have a pretty stream of thought and go. I don't always do well with the structure of things, though I work with it. I feel like we sort of talked a bit about it.
Sure.
Yeah, let's see. Maybe we come back. I think, and so the next section. Then, yeah,
we can.
I was gonna say
common patterns. Yeah, you talked a little bit about common patterns.
So I talked a little about this, but there's a good aspect in here which I can go a little bit into, which is the fight or flight response, which is just more or less so much of what we do is subconscious, right? And that's where it gets difficult to work with stuff, is how do we work with something we're unaware of, right? So even from a structural standpoint, you're just aware of standing up. You're not aware of, when you're walking, you're not really aware of which muscles are doing, which muscles firing first, and what the order is. You just sort of go and do, and it gets you to do what you need to do, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it may not be the most beneficial. And so, similar thinking of our fight or flight, we a lot of times can get when we have a stressful response. So the common, we'll say like a tiger, right? Amita, for some reason, you're back in the jungle of I don't know, the West Bengal. For some reason, you're over there, and a tiger. I just think West Bengal tigers because I used to live around there, and there were natural tigers in the Manu National Park. So you're up in that area, and a tiger comes. What do? Right? Chances are you either freeze, or
Yeah.
you say, you run, or you say, okay, I got to fight. And then what? Okay, so let's say you run and you escape the tiger, right? Then what? That pattern of contraction is part of our nervous system. So there's generally this contraction. Does it come back out? Do you feel safe? Has that resided, or has part of that stayed within the biopsychological part of the body? And so that really becomes a tie-in between that body and that mind. If we only work with, so let's say then you survive and you go to see your psychiatrist and you only work with them, they say, I was so scared, I was this and that, and you're only working on the mental aspect, that'll be helpful. Or for some reason that part of the body got stuck in this mild form, and you go to see your PT and they help you with this, that'll be helpful. But there's a coupling between them, between the mind and the body, that we have to work with both of them. This is where the somatic side of things come in, and understanding of where the body and the mind meet, and what is sometimes called decoupling. And this is what happens for a lot of people, is they see a psychiatrist for years, but they never get it out of their body. And it's why it can take much longer, or they're not always able to work with it because it's just really stuck in the body. Same frozen shoulder. When I work with people on frozen shoulder, they'll see a physio. A lot of times, I've talked to some physios who say it'll take a year to two to work with frozen shoulder. But by doing the practices through various more mind-body ways, I've had people increase range of motion that a PT that would never believe of in just a session, because we're not just working on the physical. Because a lot of times, in my experience, frozen shoulder is fear. So there's a fear, you can see, you hold on, and that connection from the mind and the body is still saying freeze, hold. And you can't just get to it from your own mental construct because it's beyond the mind. It's sort of in that fourth kosha as opposed to the third kosha we talked about. So we need to find ways of working between all of these in order to actually have that optimum health.
That's
So
very
this,
interesting because,
yeah.
sorry, that's very interesting
No, no,
because I've had frozen shoulder myself.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
went to acupuncture for I don't know how many sessions,
mm,
and I'm better, but I never realized it's the mind, what you're talking about, the correlation with the mind as
yeah.
well.
It can be. I will never say anything is exactly as it is. I speak a lot, maybe more in extremes, but there's always an other. So, but in my experience, a lot of times it is that. And I've interestingly met a fair amount of clients who I work with frozen shoulder, who all got it around the time their mother was passing or died. And they never put the correlation to it. Even it'd be interesting to talk to people and say, oh, well, when did it start? Oh, 2 years ago. Anything happened in that period? No, nothing really. My mom passed away at that time, and this and that. It's like they just never even thought, because again, if you've never been trained to see something, you won't see the correlation. And so if we don't think about the body and the mind together in that way, you would never see it. And so yeah, and maybe offline we can talk a little bit more about some ways of
Sure, sure.
working with your frozen shoulder. But I thought it'd be nice to share some of the tools. And so I really didn't want to do too many yoga postures, because my thought was that people know yoga postures, and so I wanted to bring something of yoga therapy a little different into it. And so I love working with mudras. So I thought, let's do some mudras, and let's do some mudras that can maybe work with both a physiological, but maybe a psychological or mental way as well. How does that sound?
Sure, I think that would be
Cool,
very good. Yes, because a lot of
cool.
people don't understand mudras as well. That's the other
Mm,
thing.
yeah, yeah. You know what? I'll tell a little story because I like stories. I didn't understand them either. Maybe I still don't, but I didn't understand them, and I went and did a training on them specifically because I didn't know, and I was going to do a more physical training, and someone even told me, yeah, you should do I was very more into physical, and they said you should do physical. You like this, the mudras are more energetic, and I said, oh yeah, okay. And then I said, why would I want to learn something I'm already more convinced on? I wanted to learn something I didn't understand so that I could either understand it better or also understand why I didn't enjoy it. And I took a training, and I didn't really enjoy it at first. And we were doing these mudras, and I'm thinking, okay, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. Very skeptical mind. And then we held a position in one of the mudras. And as soon as I touched my fingers in that way, my whole body lit up, just lit up with this vibration. And I said, whoa, what the hell is that? What is that? And I took my fingers apart and I went away. And I said, this is weird. Okay, let's try again. And I put back, there it was. And after that class, I did a little research on, okay, what is this mudra? What is it related to? And I forget the exact mudra it was, but it was related to something I was working in my life at the time. And I had no idea that that specific mudra had to relate with that. So I had the experience and I said, wow, there's something here. And then I had the correlation of, oh yeah, this is exactly what I'm working with. So that is what I was saying. Like the knowledge doesn't matter so much. The experience starts to become more important. And so that's where it brought it for me. So mudras, like I said earlier, they're gestures or seals, and they can be hand, but they can also be, if you were doing warrior pose and you were doing it with an intention, right? So most of the time when we do these poses, we're just flowing through them. We're not necessarily putting an intention, but if you had an intention of, okay, I'm working with the warrior as a way to, like, warrior would be about maybe a way of building more strength, right? Because a warrior is someone who's fierce. You could bring that sort of thought into it, that intention into it, and maybe even have if you have an intention like I'm strong, I don't work with intention so much, but maybe you have like something like that, you can bring that into it. And you also are changing how you're thinking about the pose. So you're really feeling your feet on the ground as a way of giving you stability. You're really feeling your heart opening up as a way of strength as well, because no one's strong by closing in. So a posture could be a mudra because you'd start to changing how you think about it. And then some of that energetic part could start to go in as well. But let's just do hand mudras for now because they're fun. And this one I really like. We're going to do 3 of them that I love because they also really start to correlate to our structure and how our structure can correlate to our mind. So for everyone watching at home, just get a seat. I mean, if it's more easy to do when sitting, but if you're standing, that's fine. And the first thing I always like to do when I work with anyone, which is usually annoying when people first start it because they don't get it, is to just notice how you feel. And this is very important because it gives us a base marker. Right? A lot of times we just run into something. Oh, okay, they did it, and I want you just to notice how you feel now. So just notice how the body feels in space, how your breathing feels, maybe how your mind feels. Some of us, we're not at that level. I was talking with someone the other day and I said, yesterday it was raining and I was feeling a little depressed, honestly. And I could say, oh yeah, I felt a mild sense of depression. They said, you could feel that? I said, yeah, I'm more aware of that. And I could feel it. And then that also gives me the tools to work with it. And so same, if I say, how did your mind feel? You might say, I don't know what you're talking about. No worries. Stick with what we have. Right? And yeah, Mita, if it's okay with you, since we're the only one talking, can I ask you how are you feeling, or you prefer not to be on
Oh no,
point?
I'm not stressed out now. I was
Yeah.
stressed out
Okay.
half an hour back, but
Yeah.
but
Okay. How did your body feel?
I think I'm good. I'm feeling pretty good
Cool.
today.
Cool.
Yes.
Cool. Cool. Well, we're going to take a note now. And we're going to come back, and you may be just as perfect. You may be even better now than later, but we'll see. So noticing just how the breath is feeling. We're going to take our hands and have our hands just come just above on. So we can have I like to have kind of like an L and a 7, and have them
Sure.
rest just on the side of the pelvis, the top of the hips, right? So
Yeah.
what's sometimes called the iliac crest. And then the arms are not, we're not going to be like Superman, and we're not going to be dropping down. We're going to find a nice sort of neutral place. And then I like to close the eyes. For some people, closing the eyes isn't comfortable, so we don't have to. But if we can, we just close the eyes and just take a few breaths in. And what I don't want is, I don't want you forcing the breath. Some people, they get into their yoga poses and they go into this pattern of forced breathing. I want it to be whatever your natural breath is. I'm going to be here for a few moments. And since I have you here, Mita, what do you, if anything, what are you noticing in your breathing here?
In breathing is, I just feel a little bit more relaxed, I think. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
and a moment of to myself, I should say that.
Yeah,
Like the
nice.
thoughts are gone, all the thoughts that go running in my head are gone now.
They'll come back, don't worry. So yeah, there's a few things that's happening. We can let that go for a second if it feels comfortable, just come back to our regular breath. There's a few things. One is, by having our hands in this way, we're sending breath a little more into our belly. Right? We're changing our physical posture so that we start to have a little more breath come deeper down because of our diaphragm. The breath never actually goes into the belly; it stays in our lungs, but we change that so that there's more the volume in the thoracic cavities changes. We also start to work a little more with what's called our vagus nerve, which is innervating all the organs down here, which is a common nerve for our parasympathetic nervous system, or rest and digest. So that's part of it. What we're also sort of doing by having that breath come down is we're also starting to create a little more awareness of our forward and back, right? And I'm going to explain that a little later. I just don't want to go too far into that yet, but we'll get back. So next we're going to do is a similar but a little different. Have our hands in a sort of similar position, and then we place them just kind of in the armpit region, right? And again, we don't want to be very militant, and we don't want to be very relaxed. We kind of have the arms just a little out. And we're going to stay here for a few breaths. If it's comfortable. Now, for some people, this actually may not be physically or psychologically comfortable. So if people are watching, I'm going to say, if you feel uncomfortable, you don't ever have to do anything. That's not the point. And again, just noticing how the breath is without trying to find something, just seeing what you notice, if anything. And of course, we're doing this a little shorter than we normally would, but that's okay. People anyone watching can take this and practice it at home, and you don't need to do. You can do it for 5 or 10 minutes, and we can talk more. Let the hands come back down and sort of say, what did you notice, if anything, in that?
I think the focus part. I feel that I'm able to focus a bit more. That's what I felt.
Yeah.
I'm not distracted, which we all are on a daily lives.
Yeah. You may have also noticed that in this way, the breath starts to come more lateral and medial, right? By having this way, as we breathe in, we start to find more of our sides of our body a little more, right? So the first time we had kind of a front and back awareness going on more because of how the breath gets directed. In this way, we create more space in the sides. And so we're starting to also define that outside of our body to the sides. All right, we have one more we're going to do. If you're really smart, you already know what direction may come, but I don't want to give it away yet. And so we're going to take the hands and let them rest just behind the sort of shoulders. And again, like I always like to say, not too strong, not too soft. Find that middle way. All right, and so the hands are going to come just onto the back sort of the neck, not the head, but more or less on the neck. If we can, elbows up. And again, if it's comfortable, close the eyes. Now this one for some may be very stimulating. So if you do start to feel a little anxiety come, just let it come down and you can come back to that first breath to help bring you back down. And then again, letting the hands come down. It's quick, so it's harder to necessarily feel all the intricacies. But what was that one like for you, Amita?
This was more, I think, more focused from my thought point of view than the other ones.
Yeah, yeah.
I felt that. I don't know how.
Yeah, no, very. This one I find can be a little more. If I was to tie the yoga Ayurvedic model of the gunas into it, I'd say
Yes.
this is very vata. This is very vata, right? The first one's a little more kapha. The second one has some pitta with it. This is very very vata, and it kind of like it starts to bring, for me, I start to get a little vata derangement where I'm also kind of going on, and it's great for lots of reasons, but it's one I think a lot of us have to be more careful with, because anxiety is vata out of balance. And so when we have anxiety and we do things that are more vata increasing, like this can be, it can spin us even further. But some of the benefits of this one are you can start to feel maybe more of that up and down breathing, up and down, right? So by doing all three of these, we've just created more awareness of our three-dimensional body in space, of which we're generally not really aware of. Most of us just kind of live forward. And if I said before, be aware of your breath, if I said your breath is three-dimensional, most people would say, yeah, but they don't actually feel it. And so what I want to have you do just now is just sit up normal, just like at the beginning, and say, okay, we did like a minute, if that, of these three mudras, but is there anything different that you're aware of? And you never need to say yes, it's okay.
I think this is the first time I'm doing mudras like this, quite honestly. If I'm stressed or have anxiety, you end up doing some of the other, listening to music or meditations, but I definitely feel more energized. Quite honestly, I know about mudras, but you never practice them, because
you never.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
I mean, we don't know the education part.
Yeah.
Not educate, I should say that.
Yeah.
So I think this really helps the way you explain the yoga therapy with the mudras, with the structural integration. A lot of people don't understand that how it combines all together. And most of us will just go do a yoga pose, like whatever you said, warrior pose or the sun salutations, but without really incorporating the breath work or without it really incorporating the mudras or the structural integration. And that's what is so fascinating, what you just described today.
Well, there's something I'll try to put in without doing too much, which is just to think about sort of what you said and bring it in, and how yoga and SI, structural integration, work for me. Is it's a lot about looking at patterns, right? So we generally go into patterns of comfort because they're comfortable. So like you said, we might just go and do a yoga pose because it's comfortable. Sometimes we do a yoga pose that is uncomfortable, but generally we go into ways of what's comfortable, and we go into our patterns. Because so like if I have that depressed type thing, I'm going to sit there more because that's familiar and that's comfortable. And if I come out of it too quickly, it can be disarming, and it may make me want to go down even more. And so by using these tools, we can start to see what is our pattern, what is our comfort, and then slowly start to play around within that field, just like we're playing around just now within our three-dimensional space, right? We can start to become more aware, like, oh, this one wasn't as comfortable. Okay, that doesn't mean don't do it. It just means, first of all, I want to say, well, why is that? And then start to play around. What would it be like if we did it a little different? And that's what's really, I think, really important. And that's again more of a, actually, even though I say it's like patterns, it's a physical pattern, but it is also in the mental constructs underneath it. And that's why I'm never bored when I work with people. There's always stuff to work, and same for myself. There's always things for myself to work with. So I'm glad that you learned something out of this, and you got some new tools. And I hope the people watching also can get these 3 mudras I have on my YouTube page. The video is not great. I may updo it, but I have them there so people can, and I have them as a series so people can follow along. You really only need the basic instruction, right? You don't need to do a follow along for 5 minutes with me. You can get the basic instruction. What do I do? And then you can do it. And then what you can also do is you can say, today I'm feeling that super vata-y. Well, I know when I did this one, I felt more calm and grounded. I'm feeling this way. Let me find the pattern that brings me the better balance. So, yeah.
That's great. That's great. No, I think it's fascinating the way you combined the yoga therapy with the structural integration and the mudras and the common pattern, which I think most of us are not really aware of, and we just do one in one kind of a thing in its isolation, and not really try to combine all the things together to help us. And that's what I feel that you did today, is really making us understand how everything can be interrelated and how it can help, it can help someone heal. So it's yes.
That's beautiful for me. I mean, that's what I hope. I'm not so concerned if I do the work with people. I mean, I'd love to help everyone. I just want people to be healthy and happy in the best versions they can. So that's what's really lovely to hear, is if that can make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let us know, our viewers who are watching us. We know this is an odd time.